Maybe you think that if you stay silent, you'll be forgotten. But what if that very silence is the reason you finally find yourself? This is the story of a woman's journey into the depths of her own soul. The power of silence. The story of a woman who found clarity in quiet. We live in a world that rushes to say something about everything, but sometimes all we truly need is a few moments of stillness to see what really matters. This is the story of someone who discovered that silence is the only way to hear the real voice of her spirit. Amelia was like so many people in the big city. Every morning, she stood in the long line for coffee, staring at her phone, reading messages from her boss, to-do lists, endless notifications. At the subway station, she lost herself among the swarm of tired faces. Even when she sat behind her bright wooden desk, it always felt like a piece of her was missing. She worked for a large advertising firm whose slogan was, "We amplify the voices of brands." But no one ever asked, if we amplify everything else, what happens to our own voice? Amelia believed that if she worked harder, if she was always available, if she always said yes, she would finally feel worthy. Year after year, she buried herself in work, in messages, in everyone's expectations. One night, when the stacks of files on her desk were so tall she could barely move, she found herself staring out through the tall glass window. Outside, the city was drenched in neon lights, but inside, something felt empty and dark. That night, for the very first time, she realized just how alone she was. The next morning, with deep circles under her eyes, she decided to take a leave. Her manager looked up and asked, "Are you sure everything's okay?" She replied softly, "No, and that's exactly why I have to do something." On her first day off, she turned off her phone, she cleaned her apartment, she opened all the windows. Then she sat down and did nothing. She didn't read, she didn't write, she didn't speak, and in that stillness, for the first time, she heard something, her own voice. 2 days later, she decided to go somewhere she'd always dreamed of, a small seaside town with white houses and cobblestone streets. The moment she arrived, it felt like the noise of the world finally fell away. Her first walk along the rain-washed cobblestones loosened something tight in her chest. She rented a little house, simple and bright, with a window that opened to an endless blue sea. Each morning, she woke up early. Before dawn had fully broken, she slipped on her slippers and walked down to the shore. She would sit on the cold sand and simply watch. At first, the silence was unsettling. Sometimes, anxiety and old fears whispered, "What if you lose your job? What if people think you failed?" But every time, she took a long, slow breath and chose not to listen to those voices anymore. Day by day, her heart grew lighter. She began to understand that she could simply exist without constant work, without endless talking, without the need for approval. One evening, it started to rain. Thunder echoed over the ocean. She switched on the little lamp, opened her journal, and began to write. About the first time she felt she wasn't enough. About all the years she'd abandoned herself. About dreams she never dared to pursue because she was afraid of what others would say. Every sentence she wrote lifted some invisible burden off her shoulders. She wrote for hours until her hand ached and her tears splashed onto the paper. That night, she made herself a promise. If she ever returned home, she would never again forget who she was. The next morning, when the sunlight spilled through the clouds, she stood by the ocean, closed her eyes and placed her hand over her heart. For the first time in years, she felt alive. Weeks later, she was ready to return, but the woman who stepped back into the office was nothing like the one who had left. She was done sacrificing herself to make everyone else comfortable. She was done being a prisoner to expectations. She walked into her manager's office and said, calmly and firmly, "I'm coming back, but not the same way. I need more time for myself. If that's not possible, I'll be happy to walk away." Her manager was silent for a moment, studying her eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "I think you finally found yourself." "I agree." From that day on, whenever the world tried to weigh her down again, she chose silence. Sometimes it was just an afternoon with her phone turned off. Sometimes it was a weekend by the sea. Every time she reminded herself that the strongest version of her was the one who found peace in stillness. Moral of the story: maybe you think if you don't speak up, no one will see you. But sometimes silence is the bravest thing you can choose. And that silence is what will bring you home to yourself. If you were in Amelia's, would you have the courage to stop everything and finally listen to yourself? Comment it.